We as human beings fear that we'll fail because we aren't good enough. We fear that we'll lose our relationships, that we'll be abandoned, even rejected because we're not good enough. We fear intimacy for the very same reason. We might get rejected because we're not good enough. Even the fear of success is based on the worry that we aren't good enough. The key to overcoming these barriers in your life, your career, family, whatever challenge that you might be facing, often means looking within and bringing about some change to reframe and gain a new perspective. Holding ourselves to the idea of doing it all or acting a specific way makes being good enough impossible. In whose eyes are we seeking acceptance? Who are the ones holding these expectations? The truth is, we are the ones measuring ourselves against such high standards. Hi everyone, I'm Savanna and this is Mental Mondays with Savanna, a motivating, mental cleansing, and energy boosting podcast. I focus on how one can improve their mental health while helping you build a better mindset, better habits, and a better life for yourself. I'm a 15-year-old CEO, a passionate storyteller, and an optimistic dreamer who views the world through a different set of lenses. I came on here to share that unique view with you. My biggest hope is that my videos ignite a spark in you to seek your highest potential and so that you can live a life without limits. Let's dive into it. Hey everyone, welcome to the 17th episode of Mental Mondays with Savanna. Thank you so much for tuning in and for making the decision to start your week off on a positive note. So, if you didn't already know, I recently started school and I'm a junior. I'm still in awe of the fact and I cannot believe how fast time flew by. To be fair, the last school year hasn't really registered in my mind yet. So now that I'm in my third year of high school is still wild for me. Anyways, I recently started school and it's my first time taking an AP class. So I'm taking AP English at the moment, and the reason I brought this up is because the other day my teacher had us watch a short film in class and analyze the different scenes and themes from it, regular AP English stuff. Now, the short film that we watched, however, is none other but The Stutterer. So, if you're not familiar with this short, please go check it out first before listening to this week's episode, since a lot of points from this episode will be based off of that film, and I don't want to spoil anything for you, so I'll link it in the description box below. Check it out. It's only 13 minutes, but it's a very powerful 13 minutes. But if you have seen this film before, you know what I'm talking about, and you know what I'm talking about, you'll know that this is a true gem. Now, The Stutter follows a young man called Greenwood Carson, and like I said before, please go watch the actual film before continuing this podcast, or else you will not understand most of the points that I'll be making throughout the episode. Anyways, the film follows a young man, Greenwood, who has an incredibly bad stutter and he navigates through life through his own way of communicating. It's a very powerful piece of communication, but I strongly believe that there's an underlying message which shows that barriers are created not only by physical condition, but by our own insecurities and our mental state. If y'all watch the film, you would notice that the main character would gradually isolate himself from society, and it even goes to the point where he often pretends that he's deaf in order to avoid having to talk to people. Once the audience was actually able to dive into the character's head and to hear his inner thoughts, we actually see that he is much more than who he appears to be. Now, I know I had a speech impediment, and sometimes it pops up every once in a while, but I'm blessed to not have as much of a handicap as Greenwood did. Still, I could relate to this story in some way, and I think everyone can, to be honest. Many times I was insecure about the way I expressed myself. I was scared that people wouldn't understand what I'm saying, and just in all, I just cared too much about what others thought about me. And I think this has happened to many people, and these insecurities are at the center of this short film, Stutterer, from the very first scene. Now, the very first scene, Greenwood is on the phone and he's trying to discuss a bill issue, and because of his speech impediment, which doesn't really let him express his problem properly, he's hung up on. Now, this very small action becomes an important part of the film later on. I believe that the ultimate message of this film is that the most powerful barriers in our life are the ones that we create. Greenwood's unhappiness may have been caused by this speech impediment, but when he's given the chance to meet the women that he's been talking to for months, his internal fears are the ones stopping him from doing what he really wants to do. Now, don't get me wrong, fighting insecurities is extremely difficult, but our own happiness depends on it. The problem that he feared that he was not good enough for Ellie. Now, by the way, that's the name of his significant others for those who forgot. It's Ellie. And as human beings, we often do this as well. We fear that we'll fail because we're not good enough. We fear that we'll lose our relationships, that we'll be abandoned, rejected, simply because we aren't good enough. We fear intimacy for the very same reason. We might get rejected because we aren't good enough. Even the fear of success is based on the worry that we aren't good enough. But we see that once Greenwood rises above that fear, he's able to live his life without placing any restraints for himself. There's this one scene where Greenwood questions his actions and asks himself, "What am I doing?" when he was evading Ellie's text. And at that moment, he realized that he couldn't let fear control his life. And he knew he had to rise above his circumstance because his perceived mishap does not define him. His stutter does not define him. Overcoming these barriers in your life, your career, even your family, whatever challenge you might be facing, often means looking within yourself and bringing about some change to reframe and gain a new perspective. Holding ourselves to the idea of doing it all or acting a specific way makes being good enough impossible. Now, here's the question of the hour: in whose eyes are we seeking acceptance? Who are the ones holding these expectations? The truth is, we are the ones measuring ourselves against such high standards. Now, the cool thing is, Greenwood's character development occurred once he realized that fact. He decided to stop hiding behind the excuse that he's deaf and make the decision to express himself towards Ellie. After he agreed to meet with Ellie in person, viewers actually see that Greenwood has the courage to speak up about other matters as well, despite the stutter that he has. One example of this that was shown in the scene is that while Greenwood was waiting for the bus at night, a random man just starts to physically harass a young lady, and Greenwood actually attempts to stop him, which is a breaking point in the story as he willingly uses his voice to speak up about the matter. I mean, it ends unsuccessfully, but it opens a new block in Greenwood's mindset. Basically, what I'm saying is that you must rise above your circumstances. The great Muhammad Ali said, "Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration. it's a dare. Impossible is potential. Impossible is temporary. Impossible is nothing. End quote. So, not only did this story motivate me to rise above my own mind block that I've set for myself, but it also showed me society's outlook on life and how it automatically groups people in different categories. Now, we've noticed that Greenwood is seen throughout the film learning sign language. You may be wondering, why would a man who lives alone and is not deaf be learning sign language? It's just because Greenwood wants to avoid speaking to people altogether. Greenwood is to the point in his life where he thinks that because of his stutter, even the simplest interactions, like asking for directions to the nearest mall, will result in him either being ridiculed or ignored altogether. Now, let's talk about that for a second. Not being able to speak is one thing, but feeling like you don't have a voice is something much worse. Now, when I say voice, I'm talking about their individuality, what makes them them. Feeling like you don't have a voice is equivalent to not having an identity. So, Greenwood forces himself to learn sign language in order to avoid the difficulties of everyday speech, such as giving directions to others. I want you to think about that for a minute and sit on that thought. Our society is hardwired to group people in categories without stopping to understand that every person is unique and every person is going through something that does not define them and should not define them. This comes when we stop grouping people in boxes and labeling them by their circumstances. In the short film, Greenwood states an interesting quote, and it says, "Music is a pleasure the human mind experiences." But I personally believe that the phrase should be, "Communication is truly the pleasure of the human soul." I think Peter Drucker said it best. The most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said, to see what isn't being shown on the outside. It's quote of the day time. So today's quote is from Ronald Reagan, and he says, "There are no constraints on the human mind, no walls around the human spirit, no barriers to our progress, except those we ourselves erect." End quote. Just remember that you have the power within yourself to make anything possible. But that only comes when you start to believe in yourself, destroying all self doubt and igniting self belief instead. You can either be your biggest help or your worst enemy. But it all comes down to how you see yourself in any given situation, circumstance, or problem. But what if I fall, you may ask? Aaron Hansen replies, "Oh, but what if you fly?" Thanks so much for tuning in to episode 17. I'll see y'all all next week. Thank you so much for tuning in. You just listened to Mental Mondays with Savanna. Make sure you click the subscribe button to receive more positivity every Monday and join the fam. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.